name is Thomas Smith. He is a lifelong conservative with deep Republican roots. From clerking for a legendary conservative chief justice to serving a decade in Attorney General Ken Paxton's office as a special assistant attorney general for criminal justice, Thomas has fought for conservative values. He helped ban sanctuary cities, wrote tough anti-human trafficking laws, yay, protected churches from radical LGBT lawsuits, and drafted the law banning online solicitation of children. A 2020 Trump delegate who worked on election integrity, he strongly backs law enforcement and victims' rights. He and his wife Audrey are raising their 2 children in Dallas and attend Highland Park United Methodist Church. Thomas will bring conservative common sense justice to the highest criminal court in Texas, stopping activist judges and keeping our families safe. So let's welcome, where'd he go? Right in front of me? All right, let's welcome Thomas Smith.
Thank you all very much. If y'all can't hear me in the back, just yell at me, please. All right. My name is Thomas Smith. I am running in the May runoff for the Court of Criminal Appeals, Place 3, one of the 4 statewide runoffs, and I'm so glad that y'all are going to get to hear from Beau French here in just a little bit as well. He's fantastic. It's always good to have more than just a couple of minutes to speak. You know, you go to a Republican meeting or you go to a forum, a lot of times you only get a minute or 2, and telling a lawyer they can only talk for a minute or 2 it's like telling a Democrat they can only vote once. So it's nice to have a little bit of time here tonight. In Hood County gave me and gave Beau our highest percentage of the vote of any county in the state of Texas. So thank you all so much for that. Awesome. Let's do it one more time. And that's no coincidence, because the caliber of people that are here in Hood County, the caliber of people are the caliber of people that care so much about our country and our state. And I think y'all realize, maybe more than any other county in Texas, how much our country is under attack and how much our state is under threats. And it's a testament to y'all how much you care about it, that you're willing to get out and work for good conservatives who want to keep this state safe, who want to keep our country the way it is, who want to save our country. I grew up in a very, very remote part of Appalachia, pretty similar to where J.D. Vance grew up, in southern Ohio. Little town of 400 people, 3rd poorest county in the state. It's actually a lot worse than where J.D. grew up. He grew up in Middletown. It's about 20,000 people. There weren't even 20,000 people in the county where I grew up. And my dad worked in the oil and gas fields there. He also built the house that I grew up in. And my mom was a public school teacher. She also was a teenage mom twice, at 15 and 17 with my sisters. You can imagine what that's like growing up in the late 50s. Despite that, she graduated from high school before she turned 18. She graduated from college with a bachelor's degree in education before she turned 20. By the time she was 20, she had 3 kids with my dad. She was teaching school full-time. She was an incredible woman. I got my work ethic from her in a little poor town that we grew up in. And I mention all that because my life has been an example of the American dream, the opportunities that you get in this country, no matter where you grow up or no matter what your circumstances are. You can do great things in this country. And I became the first person to graduate from law school in my family and went on to be invited to be the law clerk for the Chief Justice of the Ohio Supreme Court. He was a legendary judge. He was Chief Justice there for 24 years. He was on the short list when David Souter was nominated to the Supreme Court. Suffice to say, he would have been a far better choice. He was a good, conservative, principled man, the exact kind of person you would want to sit on the bench. And the Supreme Court building in Columbus is named after him. And after that, I came to Texas as fast as I could. And for the last 10 years, I've had the honor of working for conservative fighter Ken Paxton in the Texas Attorney General's office. And you all know this. We fight for you, but not only do we fight for you, we win for you. And that matters. We get wins. We have gotten a lot of wins over the last 10 years. And that matters because we have helped save Texas. And that dream, the American dream of opportunity that I just mentioned a couple minutes ago, is something that we've seen be under attack every day in the AG's office from a number of directions, from radical leftists, what I call a new age communism that has infected this country. And we fight against that every day in the AG's office. And against radical judges and activist courts who have fueled that, including this court. This court has been part of that. This is our state Supreme Court for criminal cases. One of only two of its kind in the country. Oklahoma has the other. This is the court. I'm going to mention a case that y'all have heard of in just a second, but I'm going to mention one other one first. 12 years ago, this is how long the problems of this court have been going on. 12 years ago, this court threw out our state's online solicitation law, banning online solicitation of kids by child predators. They call it a violation of the First Amendment. They threw it out as unconstitutional. The state of Texas went a year and a half without having a law that could be prosecuted for online solicitation, thanks to this court. The legislature had to step in and fix it. Not knowing that I would run for this court 11 years later, I actually worked on the legislative fix for that with the Texas legislature, and it's still held up as constitutional today. Why am I talking about a case that was thrown out 12 years, what was decided 12 years ago, 13 years ago now? Because this court, 12 years later, is still granting relief to sex offenders who were convicted under that old law, despite the fact there has been intervening Supreme Court precedent that would allow them to stop doing that. Last October, they granted relief to a sex offender who was convicted in 2012 of sending explicit pictures to a 14-year-old girl. This is your all-Republican Court of Criminal Appeals, everybody. You would think that we would have 9 solid conservatives on it, because this is Texas. And we don't even have 5. We have about 4 that you can count. And they give you decisions like that. They threw out our Open Meetings Act law as unconstitutional a few years ago. And in a case that I think most of you, if not all of you, have heard of, they took away the power of our office to prosecute election fraud in 2021. And in 2022, just to use one example, in Harris County, they had problems with multiple elections. The county judge's election there, she got 67% of the mail-in ballots in 2022. There was no state authority that could look into that thanks to this court. Now, the legislature just restored that authority last summer. Well, what does that mean? It means that the new law could get challenged again, and guess what court it could end up at? My opponent, who was a nice person and a talented lawyer, happens to be the head lawyer for the judge that wrote that decision that took away our power to prosecute election fraud. That's my opponent. She got a little more votes than I did in the primary. It is no stretch to say that the future of election integrity in the state of Texas could come down to my race. It is no stretch to say that. And if, as my boss says, if we lose election integrity, we lose everything. He's absolutely right about that. Now, I mentioned that we get a lot of wins in our office, and y'all can read, we're in the news a lot about all the lawsuits that we filed and that kind of thing. I want to talk about some wins that we've gotten that aren't in the news quite as much. It was alluded to in the introduction. We work with the legislature a lot, and that's a lot of what I've done. I was one of 2 lawyers in our office who worked with the legislature to make sure our sanctuary cities law that came out of the legislature and was signed by the governor was constitutional. It passed every constitutional test. We did pass a law to protect churches from being sued by LGBTQ organizations if churches were in the adoption business and wanted to make adoptions according to their own religious beliefs. That law survived every constitutional test. We did work on the online solicitation law. We did fight for election integrity. We need that perspective on this court. We have 6 people on this court that used to work for DA's offices. We have 3 Republicans, at least they ran as Republicans, criminal defense lawyers. It's great experience, it's fine. We do not have one person on this court that has ever had the experience of making sure that a law was constitutional from the time the first word of that law was written. And why is that important? It's important because this is a constitutional court every bit as much as it is a criminal law court. The election integrity decision that I mentioned, the election fraud prosecution decision I mentioned, was decided on constitutional grounds. The online solicitation case was decided on constitutional grounds. You need somebody who has a background in constitutional law, someone who has actually written laws with an eye towards making sure that they survive those tests. There's no one on this court that has that experience. And it's experience that this court badly needs. And I mentioned those things for one other reason, which is a lot of times when judicial candidates run, they run on the resume. And that's all they talk to you about, is their legal resume. Let me tell you, everybody running for a statewide judicial position is going to have a really good legal resume. They've gone to a good law school. They've done a lot of good things. They work for judges. My opponent's worked for a judge. She's worked for a liberal judge. She's worked for a judge. Ketanji Brown Jackson has a lot of legal qualifications. You have to ask yourself one more question, and thankfully in the state of Texas we get to vote for our judges. What have you actually done? What accomplishments do you have? That's why I bring up sanctuary cities. That's why I bring up the adoption bill that we passed. That's why I bring up working as an election integrity lawyer for Donald Trump. Because those things are important, and they're especially important because we're running in a Republican primary. Just because you're running for a judicial position does not mean that you have to stop talking about being involved in the Republican Party. Being involved in conservatism and Republican Party matters, and it really matters, I would argue, more in a judicial position than almost any other, because when we get elected to the bench, you're not going to hear much from us. You're going to expect us to go do our jobs. You're going to hear in the news about people like Beau French and the Railroad Commission, about the Attorney General, about the legislature, about the governor. You're not going to hear so much about the courts. You're going to have to trust us to be solid and dependable and to do our jobs. And for too long, we have had judges in this country who have run as Republicans or have posed as Republicans to get appointed. And they've let us down. The judge that I work for, I never saw him let people down. Sometimes he made decisions that people didn't agree with, but he was very consistent and dependable and conservative. And he knew the most important thing, which is when he got up in the morning to protect the Constitution, to work to uphold the rule of law, and he always understood that our ultimate wisdom came from our Creator. And that's what drove him every day. That's what will drive me on this bench. I'm going to mention one other thing, and I'd be glad to answer any questions after that. Check out my website, smithfordtexas.org. I've got, I think, over 75 conservative endorsements from across the state. I've got about 20 that I have not added yet, including the Attorney General. We appreciate you checking that out and taking a look at it. Because the biggest endorsements that my opponent has gotten so far have been the Dallas Morning News, Houston Chronicle, the Austin American Statesman. I think there's a big contrast there. We are one good conservative judge away from giving y'all the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals that y'all have deserved for a long, long time. And I would ask for your vote and your help on May 26th and an early voting prior to that. Thank you all very much.
Anybody have any questions? Well, I want to say this. If we don't protect our courts, we'll lose our state. So we have to protect our courts. And what he just said, we're 1 court away. So let's make it happen here in Hood County, okay? Or even you get on to friends in other counties. Get on to everybody. Let them know we need Thomas Smith on our court. Oh, Marietta?
You worked in the AG's office, and are you familiar with the law that prohibits
You worked in the AG's office, and are you familiar with the law that prohibits devices connected to our infrastructure, our grid, that communicate through our grid that can't be foreign made or contained? Can you elaborate a little bit on that for us? Because we're dealing with that with BESS units here, with data centers, and with other things, and I'd love to hear from you exactly how we can fight those kinds of developments using the law that you were a party to passing.
It's actually a really good question because I did not know anything about that until last summer. And I had someone who's become a good friend out in Van Zandt County contact our office about that. They're dealing with this very similar issue out there. And we worked on that. It took a little bit of time. But now we're investigating it. There's an active investigation on that, and it is something that we're concerned about. It is something I think that the legislature needs to take up and take seriously, and it's certainly something that the next AG, I think, will be paying close attention to. We've actually kept, at least a couple of candidates advised on what we're doing on that. So, yep. Well, no. I can tell you a little bit about it. So one of the issues was the legislature passed a law that dealt with infrastructure and cyber-related infrastructure a couple of sessions ago, I think. And I think that it laid out certain parameters that were prohibited by outside entities, foreign influences, that kind of thing. It's not my area of legal expertise. However, the initial look at it was, this is something the legislature, this is why I mentioned the legislature, they need to take it up and look at tightening that up and putting the enforcement mechanism into it. There actually is no specific enforcement mechanism into it to say the AG's office has to do this. So if by default, a lot of those things fall to us. When I was involved in writing legislation, and some of the other folks in our office who have gone on to other things, we actually like to have that enforcement mechanism in there. That's one of the features of the Sanctuary Cities law. If y'all ever think that Granbury is a sanctuary city and you want to file a complaint, any of you in this room can do it. All you have to do is file it with our office, and it triggers a mandatory investigation. That's how we wrote the law. And also, I know Mays will talk about this when he comes here in a few weeks. If an investigation yields that an elected official or an appointed official has enabled a sanctuary policy to exist, the law requires the AG's office to seek the removal. Requires. It's not discretionary. It's mandatory. That law, in my view, my personal view, of stepping outside the candidate just to speak as a citizen, that hasn't been used enough. And I think in the future it's going to be, if we continue to have the problems with immigration we've had. Hi.
Hi there. I read this morning that in Dallas there's a new radio station, and it is an Islamic radio station. And it is geared to promote the Islamization of Texas and Sharia law. And I think we've got to be proactive and not reactive. Would you comment on that?
Yeah, sure. And I'm sure Bo will talk about this as well. He's become very much of an expert on talking about this kind of thing, but I'd be glad to talk about it. 2 quick points. Any legal system that is attempting to spread under the cloak of religion and is also completely at odds with our constitutional structure needs to be rejected in every single way possible.
Yes.
Every way possible. The First Amendment gives you the right to worship freely. It has never been construed. There is not a single case in the history of the United States that has ever interpreted the First Amendment to give a legal system cloaked under religion the authority to usurp our Constitution. That has never happened. And it must never be allowed to happen. Ever.
Well, she kind of touched on it. I just read, I think, did Governor Abbott just stop the development of Epic City up in the north part of Dallas? And, you know, what I've been reading is we can't use the Constitution protects so many things, the U.S. Constitution, that we can't discriminate against any group or anybody based on a religion. But where do we go with trying to say this is not, even if you want to call it a religion, these people are still can be considered terrorists. I don't think there's such a thing as a radical Muslim. I think they're all radical. It's in their books. It's in their belief. It's everything. So how do we stop that when our U.S. Constitution protects so much under the religion thing?
Yeah, so they love to fight at a local level. They love to push at a local level. And that battle starts here. It starts in Collin County, at a county level, a local level. It has to be engaged at that level. Because they will fight to change names of streets. And then they'll move on to something else. And then they'll move on to something else. And before you know it, there's an honor killing that happens, and somebody's lawyer walks into a court. This is a hypothetical. We deal with hypotheticals in law school. Someone engages in an honor killing, walks in, they have an activist judge at a county court in, say, Dallas County, and say, Judge, we have an affirmative defense here. This is a religious, kind of thing. How far are we from having a judge to sign off on that, right? And so, to kind of bring it back to this court for a second, what happens if this court got a case like that, right? So, you don't have to think very far in the future or jump through too many hoops to get to a point where you could actually be dealing with something like that. You better have the right judges on courts to interpret our Constitution accordingly, because here's the thing. Radical Islam, or however you want to couch it, okay? They're used to taking this much and turning it into this, and then turning it into that. I spent a summer in Israel in 2012. One of the things I learned over there is that the thing that matters most in that part of the world, maybe the only thing, is strength and respect. If you lack those two things, or one of those two things, you'll get run over. And so those are the things that have to be shown in the struggle that we're in.
Back
Yes?
to what they said about data centers. As far as them having have all US-made equipment. Can foreign companies own them?
Can who?
Foreign companies.
To my knowledge, there's nothing in state law, and I could be wrong, that it would prevent foreign companies from owning them.
Is that something you can address? Because, you know, even if they use American equipment, if they're being owned and run by foreign companies, what protection do we have?
Yeah, so the question is, could foreign companies own data centers, say, in the state of Texas? And I think the answer is they can. Whether they could not is up to your elected representatives to decide otherwise.
Anyone else?
Thank you all very much. So good to be here.
Since I got a little bit off my script a while ago, I have a couple of things that I want to talk about real quick.